Hello. Welcome to the last session of the Food Rescue Hero 2024 conference. Demystifying data, make data work for you. This is a panel discussion. I'm Sean Hudson, the Director of Data Analytics at Food Rescue Hero and 412 Food Rescue. You're not going to hear a ton from me. Mostly you will be hearing from my colleagues and friends here. I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit more, but give you an idea of what we're going to talk about, just how they use data in their work, data storytelling, and just like kind of where things are at in our various spaces with data. You'll be hearing from Naveen, from CMU, Mary Fleck at the Allegheny County Department of Human Services. She was nice enough to join us at the very last minute. Someone had a conflict, couldn't make it. But the DHS here does incredible work and use data in really fascinating ways, and she's going to talk to you about that. And Sat Miller, who has been talking to us for a while about doing this, so very excited. With that said, let's talk to Demeen.
Sounds great. I can introduce myself a little bit first before going into the presentation. So I'm Naveen. I'm currently a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon, and I work on kind of the intersection between technology and kind of this food rescue, food sustainability, trying to see how can we take some of the advances we've seen so far in machine learning and other kinds of new technologies and apply them to kind of food rescue platforms and other things to make them more efficient and work kind of more smoothly in some sense. And so today, what I'll be talking about is how we can use data and how we particularly use data in our day-to-day, and kind of three key ingredients, three key steps so that we can use data in this kind of platform. And so the kind of three big picture things that I'll be talking about today are how you should explore your data, how we should build simple models, and how to kind of evaluate objectively in some sense. And I'll first talk about these at a high level, saying like, what are the big kind of takeaways? How do these actually work kind of in principle? And then I'll move on to specific examples through kind of a specific project we did to show how do each of these actually kind of unfold in reality. And so the first thing that we talked about is explore your data. And so the big thing with that is you always want to make sure that you understand the data you're working with. For example, good things to do is to check, are there outliers in these different fields? What is the kind of distribution of different elements in these kind of different fields, different tables and whatnot? Because when you're working with real world data, things are very messy. For example, when you're taking a survey and the survey answers are yes and no, you might get something that says maybe or not applicable or something very kind of random that you didn't expect. And so you want to kind of clean your data, make sure that you know what's in your data before you go on to kind of actually build models or analyze the data or do other things. The second thing is to start simple. A lot of times people, especially in kind of more technical domains, really like to just start with the latest new technology you've seen, just throw it at the data. But a lot of the time, what you want to start with when you're kind of analyzing data and building models is to start with the simplest kind of baseline that you have, so that you get a sense of like, okay, this is how well I can do without really doing much work. And then you want to build upon this kind of iteratively, try out new things and see, can I build a better model to predict this or analyze this or something like that? Basically from simplicity, so you can see like, what is the impact of all these small changes? The third thing is you want some kind of metric for evaluation. You want to make sure that whatever you're trying to evaluate, you can evaluate objectively. And this is helpful because you can iterate upon your models. You can say, oh, this model didn't do so well. Let's move on to a better model. And you can keep kind of quickly iterating through these different models and see what works well. And you have like a actual real world sense of how well things work. But the challenge here is making sure that you develop objectives that actually are important, that actually match kind of the things that you want. And so what I'll be talking about today is how we use each of these in like a real world case study where we combine data with machine learning in a food rescue context. And so the kind of question that we were trying to answer is, can we modify some of the notification algorithms to improve volunteer engagement? And for some background, we were trying to look at kind of these notification algorithms for food rescue platforms to see, can we maintain both the trip completion rate, which is the number of trips completed by volunteers, while also making sure that more volunteers stay on the system, or to reduce this kind of like volunteer burnout or increase volunteer engagement. At a high level, what we did is we first built a new algorithm that improved notifications, and we did some like theoretical analysis on these algorithms to ensure that they work well. And then we evaluated this using kind of both synthetic data and then kind of a simulation using real world food rescue data. And if you're interested in this kind of work a little bit more, there's a QR code on the slide to see like, oh, this is the kind of technical details of what exactly we did. But at a high level, that's kind of the process that we did. And then I'll get into kind of the specifics of how we applied each of the 3 steps from before. And so the first thing to kind of talk about is exploring your data. And so I'll say how we did this in our particular scenario. We were interested in exploring how burnout and re-engagement impact different kinds of volunteers. And what that means is if a volunteer completed a trip in 1 week, what is the chance that they complete a trip in the next week based on, say, the number of notifications that they received? To investigate this, we wanted to see what does the pattern actually look like right now. So we plotted this against the number of notifications they received on a week-by-week basis. This is helpful because we get to see the kind of trends and where these trends might be interesting or differ. And so what we found through our exploration is that when it depends on the kind of the volunteer experience. For example, we have 3 columns corresponding to volunteers with 3 levels of experience. And you see that there's different patterns in terms of how they get engaged or disengaged based on their kind of volunteer experience. And this kind of information is insightful because when we go to build models, we have a sense for like, okay, one of the important factors when building this model or building this algorithm is to take into account the level of volunteer experience so that different volunteers with different levels of experience get different numbers of notifications. And this gives us a little bit of intuition for the problem as such. Another kind of good example of why we explore our data or how this kind of works is to get a sense for like, okay, what is the actual trip completion rate by different volunteers and how does it actually look like in kind of real food rescue data? And so what we did here is we just took all the kind of trip completion rates by the for each volunteer and we plotted this. And what you can find through this kind of exploration, kind of exploratory analysis, is that the distribution is very close to 0 for a lot of volunteers. Most volunteers complete very few trips, but some volunteers complete a lot more. And this is helpful because it gives us a sense for the kind of data we see and kind of the volunteer behaviors as a result of just analyzing this data. The second step that we talked about is building simple models. So for our kind of task, what we wanted to see is, can you build a better model to improve upon some of the baselines? And the reason we kind of the place we started for this is to build very simple models. So what you can see is we built a couple different very simple models. For example, we built a very basic solution called Greedy, which is one of the ones in gray, which only notifies some of the active volunteers. And so the reason we did this is to get a sense for like, okay, what happens with the most basic solution or maybe the existing solution? And we get a better sense for, okay, if we develop our own algorithms, which are the ones in blue, then we have this much of an impact or this much of kind of a benefit versus some kind of baseline or some kind of simple model. And we have a better sense for like, how well does our algorithm work and what is the actual kind of benefit we get when using our algorithm. The third kind of key step or key kind of component is to evaluate objectively. As kind of mentioned before, the objective, for lack of a better word, of our study was to see, can we improve the trip completion rate, which is the number of trips completed, and can we make sure that more volunteers are engaged? We translated each of these into kind of more theoretical ways to measure these, at least in kind of simulation. And the challenge is to make sure that whatever you measure in simulation or however you simulate this kind of objective is not too far removed from reality so that when you actually go to use kind of the models you build in reality, they actually work. And so we spent some time thinking about how exactly can we define these in kind of simulation or in kind of a more theoretical construct. We have 2 plots for this. One is the one on the left for trim completion rate, and one is the one for engagement rate on the right. And having both of these helps us give a sense for like how well does our algorithm do. And what we found through our kind of analysis or exploration is that our algorithms, the one in blue, improves the trip completion rate, as you can see on the left, while also improving the volunteer engagement rate over time, which is the one you can see on the right. And so through our objective measures, what we get a better sense for is how much better does our algorithms do and for what kind of objective measures do they do better. And so to kind of summarize the key steps and the key things we talked about, there's 3 kind of big takeaways. One is that visualization is key. Make sure that you understand your data before you build models so you get a sense for the distribution of things, what the actual data looks like, how messy it is, and things like that. The second thing is to build simple models first. Make sure you start with the simplest model or the simplest kind of baseline you can. And so you can add complexity in later, but you want to make sure that you have like a ground truth or like a baseline to say, this is the easy solution I have, and this is what I can build on. The third thing is to evaluate using objective metrics. This is helpful because then you can iterate very quickly. You can build upon your solution very quickly. And also you have a sense for like, okay, this is how well my metrics work in some objective sense. The challenge here is making sure that your metrics are both kind of easy to implement in simulation or in your data, while also being kind of closely tied to reality. The fourth kind of action step here is that if you have a problem like this, people in academia, professors, PhD students, and whatnot, are more than happy to help. So feel free to send us an email, or feel free to just contact us through email or our website or whatnot, and we're more than happy to chat about these kind of tasks.
That was great. All right. Thank you, Naveen. I was kind of finishing up some notes. I have a bunch of questions. So you understand that we've been working with Naveen and his group for a good while now, right? Like we've known your advisor for years. Been working together. It's been a great relationship. We have always really enjoyed working with CMU. If you get the chance, you should reach out to them. There is a good chance that someone in a department will be happy to work with anyone in food rescue. Next up, I want to give Mary Fleck the chance to introduce yourself a little bit and then talk a little bit about what you're doing these days.
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Fleck. I manage a team of data analysts at Allegheny County Department of Human Services. And my team looks specifically at data related to the criminal justice system here in Allegheny County. And so a pretty different domain from a lot of the work that you all are doing, but the takeaways are mostly the same. So much of what Naveen was talking about resonated with me as far as our process for approaching analytics, some of the cornerstones that make it all possible, and kind of principles for best practices. So I'll talk about driving insights from data with specific examples from what we're doing here at Allegheny County Department of Human Services. And hopefully that'll just help to paint the picture kind of in another way, and maybe will inspire you in some way for the work that you're doing. So, and of course, looking forward to hearing any questions folks have. So yeah, just kind of like a broad shell of an agenda here, talking through some of those cornerstones. So data collection, storage, and maintenance is like, super unsexy, and like none of the exciting analytics can happen without running a really tight ship there. So the fact that my team exists and that we get to do the work that we do is because of the infrastructure that has been built by folks who came before me at my organization. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll get into kind of different types of analytics, which is, really kind of the bulk of where my team and a lot of our analytics department spends their time, and then talk about applications for machine learning in what we're doing over here as well. If you'll hit yep. So here's just like the baseline takeaways. That data collection piece, storage, maintenance, it's crucial and it's worth effort. As for the data analysis, it's important to understand the needs practically, understanding what kind of storytelling is really effective, and scoping problems and projects really well, and prioritizing accordingly. And then with machine learning, assessing models really thoroughly and understanding kind of the consequences downstream and upstream of implementing those models, and being able to explain the value add. So I think if you have any takeaways, I think this would be the things that I hope you would take from what I'll share. Yeah, so data collection, storage, and maintenance. If you'll keep going here, we've got, this is just like a short overview, and my slides are not as verbose. They're just giving me a crutch to talk mostly, but yeah. So our data warehouse brings together and integrates client and service data for all of the county's systems. And so in the early aughts, the director of DHS was able to attribute some capacity to putting together this data warehouse where we're able to match individuals at the client level. And so the systems that are housed within the Department of Human Services are very wide reaching and very different from each other. So, we've got like the CYF, which is like, child welfare and like a child protective services type services. And then we've got criminal justice, and we've got like the housing space. And so those are totally different domains. But often we're serving the same clients. And often it's really important to know, like, if I'm seeing someone in the child welfare space, like, are they also involved in the criminal legal system? If someone is having interactions across the system, there are lots of places that we can potentially intervene to make someone's experience better, to reach people who really need us, or to say, like, this person probably shouldn't be involved in the system because of their involvement in other places. And so for us to be able to understand that better, we built this data warehouse where we're able to take in information from all these different places, match it all together, and house it. And so we have a team of consultants that cares for that database and is constantly adding new data sources, and they're fielding questions from us as we're using it, and that's like totally the crux of of everything that we do here. And so I think when I think about the biggest challenges that we have analytically, it's often less so about the problem itself and or the analytical question than about the process. For example, my team deals with lots of data from the criminal justice system, and so in some of our data sources there are the jail and the court system. And those places, they have really tidy ways of keeping data, whereby someone comes in and they can't move to the next step unless the data goes in and it looks a certain way. And the fields are required. And so there's a level of data cleanliness that is guaranteed for us in some systems. But some of our other data is from our providers who we're contracting to provide interventions to individuals who are involved in the criminal justice system or in other systems. And so it's up to us in those processes to determine how we're going to collaborate with providers to ensure that they have a software that works for them, that they can collect what needs to be collected, that it's flexible enough to handle the variety of circumstances that they might come across, but that is rigid enough that we know our data is going to be clean. And important always to keep an open channel of communication so that, if there is a situation that the data infrastructure doesn't allow them to enter data that corresponds to reality, right? So they can communicate that to us, and so that we can learn about that as those things come up. Very important stuff. And this is a space where Allegheny County is really innovating. We're in quite a few different groups of individuals in the criminal justice kind of domain area and in other domain areas where we're kind of chatting with other local governments. And this is something that almost nobody is doing or has done. So we'll move forward from there to chat a little bit about the data analysis itself and data for operations. And so what you're seeing here is some screen caps from a public dashboard that my team maintains. That is the Allegheny County Jail Population Management Dashboard. There's a bunch of different views there where you can see things like the average daily population at the jail. Who are those folks who are incarcerated, what the demographic breakdowns are, some of like why people are being held. There's a lot of interesting things that you can find there, and I think it is an easy way for us to dispel, I think, a lot of misconceptions around the jail, or just a lack of understanding. I think, for example, people who are unfamiliar with the criminal legal system might not understand that a jail is different than a prison, for example. And so most of the people who are in our facility locally, the median length of stay is only 15 days. So most of the people who are there aren't there for very long. And that absolutely informs how we're providing services. And so there are a number of public tools that we've created, like this public dashboard, that are intended to be tools to educate the public, and the those serve a purpose of helping us to communicate, like why we attribute funding in a certain way, or why we're doing certain things, or to I think like educating the public is valuable in and of itself, right? Even without there being some end on our side. But there's a ton of other analytics that we need to do in-house, right, to make sure that our programs are running how we intend for them to run, and to do outcome evaluations, right, to see whether the programs that we're running are actually improving folks' lives, or to understand better, like what else is happening for people who we're serving. And so something that some things that I think are salient throughout all of our projects kind of in this domain are, just practicality. I think when you look at this, you'll see this is kind of showing among jail entrants, people who are booked in the jail, like what other systems they've been involved with. And we've just got like some super basic pie donut charts, right? Like it's not anything complicated. And I think it's fun to use all of the new visualizations and capabilities that sometimes are available, or to do something really creative. But usually it's something that is really basic, that's going to get the point across most easily to the user, even a user who is really educated in the program area. So about whatever you're putting the resource together for. And then being really practical about scope has also been really important, because we've created, this resource and many other resources that are these dashboards that you can play around with and do lots of customize your own analysis for yourself. It's exciting. And oftentimes people will reach out to our team and say, oh, we want you to make us this dashboard. And we kind of have to do this job of negotiating, right? Do you really need a data? How often do you need to look at a new view of this data? If realistically you need an analysis, you need to have a finding today, and you're not going to need a new finding. You're not going to need an update on that analysis for a month. Maybe let's build you a report instead, and put our analytical capacity somewhere else. And so I think doing the thing that is exciting or feels innovative is not always the best way to spend your time, or to just the most practical way to use your resources. So that's always just always something that we're talking about here, and thinking about the best way to market our capacity. So now I'll chat about machine learning and some of what we're doing here at the county. This is lots of words, so don't read it. I mean, you could read it, but I highlighted the bits that are important. This is just from 2 of the machine learning models that Allegheny County Department of Human Services has in production right now, that we're using for directly to make decisions on programs. There's also work that we're doing in my domain related to criminal justice that I'll touch on in just a second. But what I'll show you here is these are an example. And the one on the left is where we have a model that is predicting folks probability of being involved in mental health inpatient stay, jail booking, or frequent use of emergency rooms. And we're using that to support our prioritization for folks for housing services. And then on the right, that's one where we are looking at different outcomes to try to decide whether to investigate in a child welfare situation. And so it's just two examples of some of what we're doing. Most of what the machine learning work that the Department of Human Services is doing is kind of using our client level data and where we're able to see folks showing up across the system to predict risk, and particularly risk of these like negative outcomes, and using those indications of high risk through our models to determine whether or not we should intervene in some of the places where folks are involved in the system earlier on. And so it's been really powerful to be able to use our data in this way. And it's been, there's been lots of great findings on these same sites. These are like on the Allegheny County Department of Human Services like public website. You can see some of like how things are going so far. And it's been amazing to see I think what strides we've been able to make by employing these models, and at the same time, it's really challenging, right? In order to ensure that these models are doing good, we have to be vetting them in many ways, right? We have to make sure that even if there's nothing kind of discriminatory baked into these models, that the result isn't that we're only investigating cases where it's Black families or something like that. And so the downstream effects, understanding the collateral consequences has been crucial. And I don't know whether this audience would have already known about these or been keeping tabs, but there was a court case that came up that was where a family felt that they were being discriminated against, and that it could have something to do with our screening tool. And so we have had to defend our tools in the court of law. And so not to say that you all would be in that position, but I think that maybe go through that thought experiment as you're building the model to say would I really stand by what this is doing, and as we're going through the use case, is there something like easier that we can do? I think doing using what is a heuristic that has been used historically isn't always the innovation is not always necessary. And so understanding what that trade-off is, the risk that you're taking versus the innovation and what that will afford you is always really important. So yeah, I think I maybe am close on time, so I can keep the example of where we're doing modeling in criminal justice domain in my back pocket for questions later. But yeah, so those are kind of the overview of what we're up to here at DHS, and some principles that I think that are really important in data.
Yeah, that is extremely cool. I already have a number of follow-up questions. I'm not going to get to them just yet. So I have the most passing familiarity with Naveen and Mary's work. I read the paper on the family risk screening tool, and I went to school with probably many of your employees at GSBS, and I worked with Naveen and team for a super long time. So very excited to hear from Seth Miller. Work is very much intersecting with everything I do, working in a food rescue organization. But yeah, haven't had as much of a chance to see what she's working on. So very excited to introduce to you Seth Miller.
Sure. Before I go, Mary, I really appreciate what you just covered. I know what it takes to make that complex information available for public and such a large audience. And I really like that machine learning approach you just shared, super resonated with me. I have lots of questions, maybe a chat with you after this session. But yeah, myself, Seth Miller, I'm a data scientist with FoodWorks Group. We are a women-owned, mission-driven food systems consultancy. We help clients solve operational challenges or maximize their impact or adapt to this very fast-paced evolution of food systems. All right, and the next slide. Yeah, so this is a snapshot of what we just worked on and for the last few years. Recently, we helped value-added meat processing facilities. They make sausages, beef jerky, bone broth, and such. We help them reduce animal waste in the East Coast. And then on the West Coast side, we helped Food Bank build a multi-year strategic plan focused on food rescue. All right, next one. And then outside the FoodWorks Group, I teach data storytelling at Stanford University. Although I work on data, lots of data, my goal is to fill the gap between data and the human element, because I fully believe that real change in any organization is powered by its people. So my focus is to help people create impactful data communication that resonate with their audience or influence their audience. All right. And so the next one. So I'm sure you had a situation where you are super convinced about your strengths of your findings and data and analytics. Then you would say, oh yeah, data speaks for themselves. Then, you'd expect your audience, to be very enlightened or motivated to pursue actions that you recommend. And we often discover, to our disappointment, that facts don't seem to stand on its own. That's where the data storytelling comes in. I'm sure, Sean, with your recent webinar, you were sharing tons of great tips there. But helping the audience understand what's happening or taking action towards your ideal state, it really takes data storytelling, because that's not what they're thinking about. Data is complex. There's so many impacts that the aspects of data you need to think about. Next one. So so my hope today, I'm going to share some tips and best practices that I road tested for organization like yours, or government agencies or private organizations to do reduce food waste or rescue food or food system in general, or food insecurity. All right, so my hope is that you find something so you can influence your own audience so they would rescue food. So let's go over some of the slides. Yeah, so this one. So at Stanford, there are professors. You probably heard Chip and Dan Heath. They wrote a book called Made to Stick. It's about making your facts stick, so they tend to, your audience, your readers will take action. So what they tested was, how much people would remember, right? And when they tested the statistics with data and the story, what they're saying is only 5% of students remembered data, numbers, statistics, yet more than 60% remembered story. So why is that? Next one. Next slide. All right, so you can see where the part of your brain, that reacts to the facts or reacts to stories. So we work with a neuroscientist, and when it comes to data storytelling, we looked at what part of the brain works and to communicate your story through data. So you can see storytelling makes your brain light up in a way that no other form of communication does. So again, when you share data, I would fully recommend, putting together a story in such a way that your audience understands. Next one. So you can click like 3 times, maybe you will see 3 elements. Thank you. So what is data storytelling anyway? So that it's a process of translating complex data or analysis into compelling narratives. So your audience can unlock their insights or inform decision makings or sometimes drive actions, right? So what does it do? Those 3 things. It's not just showing data. Like Naveen said, he talked about the visuals make it easier to for audience to understand. So next one. So click here. Yeah. So I want you to understand how narratives and data works together. So when narratives is coupled with data, it helps explain, right, what's going on. And when narratives coupled with visuals, it becomes more engaging. And the visuals applied to data, it enlightens again. And click one more time. And when those all work together, you tend to influence, you tend to, provide compelling data stories. All right, so what we should do to do that? And again, there's so many things to do, but for this webinar, I just share a few tips. Here, one of the things I often see, since the data is so complex for the food rescue and food waste, we tend to show everything, right? Then when people look at it, they were like, huh? That's just too complex to understand. So this is one of the fundraising, the real data sets that we used. And what we suggested to our team is that, why don't we just remove the clutter so it's easier and then the story will reveal by itself. Next slide. So this one is a before and after, right? Oh. Yep, before and after. So you can see on the right side, it's less brain consumption. When your brain doesn't need to work that hard, your story is much easier to get into your audience head. All right, so we looked at the design principles here. So for example, left and right, when you compare, you can see the right axis, XY axis, it's much easier, no grid, no more than 3 colors, no more than 4 data points, because our research suggests people can't remember more than 4 data points. And the takeaway and headline in the title, instead of saying a monthly fundraising, we looked at the story. What do you want your audience to take? All right, next one. So this one is somewhat famous, somehow not really used much, but Z pattern. When people look at your dashboard or your paper or your presentation, they're not reading, they're scanning. So to make sure that they scan in the right format, what we call it Z pattern, that's where people move their eyes. So why don't we use the first and last as a very expensive real estate, right? You don't want to put your hero message in number 3, for example, because they're still going through this eye movement. So using that, next one. So if you have presentation or dashboard, you want to make sure that Z pattern is logically followed. So your audience, whoever you're speaking to, can follow it in an easier fashion. So that's something we would like to share for visualization. And next one. So here, I'd like to show these 10 techniques. These techniques, it came from Tactical Technology Collectives. They're building, they're in Germany, and they're a nonprofit organization. They work with tech, human rights, civil rights organizations. So basically, this visualization technique is for advocates or activists use visual elements in their campaign. So I am not going over all those 10 techniques, but I am using this very compelling visual from refed. So you can see, like I would say, they're using a technique called compare or contrast, so people can easily understand which foods are surplus. And when you look at the title and then the structure, I know they're following the pattern we just covered. The next one, next slide. So this is one of the visualization we at FoodWorks Group created for Hennepin County in Minnesota. So we wanted to show the contrast where the food insecurity areas are. So you can see the darker spot, darker orange, is the higher food insecurity. And then the blue icon here, the plus icon, that shows the number of food agencies like Food Hub or food banks, food kitchen, and soup kitchen and stuff. But you can see the contrast on the northern part, or the food insecurity is higher in that area. There are not many resources available. So it was very actionable insights that we could share. All right. So the next one, if you recall those 3 circles, like one of the circles for data storytelling is about narratives. And when it comes to narratives, a lot of people follow these story arcs. In fact, Andrew Regan from University of Vermont discovered, he used the AI to look at thousands of stories across the nation, across the culture. And then he found out there are 6 stories when it comes to very compelling stories. And this is some of the story arcs that a lot of movie, the plot types follow. All right. So how can we use this for our data storytelling, you may wonder. And I would like to show one of the examples here. And you can see, those 5 points each has used and applied for the story arcs here. So for example, retention, persuasion. When you think about the Cinderella, there's this up and down and sad and happiness, right? And then the impact of the retention is really high. So again, how can we use this type of story arc for your storytelling with your data? Let's go over this. Next. I'd like to share this very good example of storytelling with data. Maybe some of you know Charity Water. They're the organization that provide clean water to the area. It could be hit by this natural disaster, or it could be hit by wars. So this nonprofit organization provide water. But the CEO here, Scott Harrison, he did an excellent job using a story arc, one of them, Cinderella, here. And I'd like to show you how he presented his data using the story arc. Next slide. All right. So as he curated, Scott, exclusive group of people to share his story, and of course to ask for increasing the fund. In his speech, he connected the audience with this data in a very, very beautiful fashion. So first, he talked about like, oh yeah, we started this Charity Water. Each year our fundraising, revenue is going up. So everything is great. So you can see that arc, just like Cinderella, it's going up. And next slide. Yeah. However, it hit the plateau. And then, so one year, the revenue went down like, oh, that is very sad. But instead of saying the revenue went down, he actually humanized his story. So looking at the highlighted area, instead of saying revenue, he used the people, like 1 million people, right? We could provide some water, but next year it reduced to 820,000. So that's an impact. So again, instead of using a dollar amount, Scott Harrison used people to make his story more compelling. Next slide. And then he created the subscription approach, $30 a month. He could help the number of people. So things actually went really well. So you could see he still follows Cinderella arc here. Next slide. And to his surprise, this subscription worked very well. And each year, their fundraising just went above and beyond their expectation. And you can see the growth here. So what I'd like to highlight here is this unexpected outcomes, just like Cinderella. And then one of the author, Will Storr, like he wrote a book called The Science of Data Storytelling and Science of Storytelling. Unexpected change makes us curious. And then the curious is how we should feel in effective stories. So, I know some people don't want to share unexpected things, but to captivate, to engage your audience in the way to make your story memorable, to make data understandable, I would highly encourage that you share unexpected thing. Next. So the next slide is the last slide from Scott Harrison. So again, he is humanizing the impact. 4,000 brand new people can get water. It's very great. Then the call to action is very clear. So now people are very much engaged and they're moved by his story and how many people this charity water is helping. So it's easier. He's actually making it easier for audience to take an action, basically donate, right, for this organization. All right, so I, covered a lot of things very quickly, and I hope you find some of the tips and tools helpful. I just want to show where to go from here because it's such a short webinar. If you're interested in data storytelling, I put some of the articles and links there. And next one, this is a tool that you can use for visualization. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is originally used for Financial Times for their storytelling, what kind of visualization works well with what kind of audience. So I hope you will find this helpful. And then, again, food rescue, food waste, reducing food waste, those two are very, close to my heart. And then, for people out there, thanks again for working very hard to combat this food insecurity and hunger. All right, Sean, back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was excellent. I also always appreciate a good refed shout out. We basically, like everyone in the space is well aware of the great work that they do. We work with them all the time. They are literally where we have in-app CO2 EQ equivalency numbers. So like those come directly from the Insights engine. If you want to look into like how to reduce carbon emissions, particularly through reducing food waste, you should absolutely look into Refed. They are the best anywhere at that specifically. And they are wonderful and very easy to talk to and contact. I do have a couple of questions. We got a few minutes. There is a chat, so if people please, I meant to say this earlier, please use the Q&A, go crazy. But with that said, I have a couple to start with. All right. So I noticed there was actually like a lot of overlap in here. One, I mentioned that I read like the paper on the family risk screening tool. And so I know a little bit, inside baseball on this one. It uses actually a pretty simple model. There aren't a ton of variables. And it's actually like famously kind of interpretable, right? Like at least at the time that I read it, it was like a ridge regression is what people call it. Before that, it was logistics, and neither of those are super complicated. It's actually kind of more for Naveen and Mary. Do you kind of any order that you like? How do you think that goes in like maintaining, trust for the people using the model? And also like, in the case for Mary, do you think that made it easier to defend its use?
Yeah, happy to jump in. I think I will disclaim that because the AFST is COIF domain, it's less my bread and butter than some other things. But we talk about it all the time, so I feel comfortable speaking to it. Yeah, I mean, I think as of late, it's been really important for us. I think like lots of, I think input was used in the process of establishing the model, like input from caseworkers and from folks like on the ground in COIF, was involved in the process, and I think that that's like been really important and crucial to maintaining it and to arguing for its use. And also, it's been important for us not to let lie the work that was already done on that. Recently, I think we've been trying to think about how we can continue to train new caseworkers in using the AFST and how they can like understand and wrap their heads around like how this tool should be should think about this tool. And I think that like continues to help us to continue to get feedback from the system and to like cover any holes where like people are like, wait a minute, it shouldn't, like I have questions about, and then we're able to kind of like work out that tension together of like, is this a problem? Should we run this up the flagpole? Is this something we haven't seen yet or thought about? What we find and what we found through kind of that legal process we went through recently is that we did think of a lot of things and did, a lot of testing there. But would be curious to hear your thoughts about kind of like that in general, Naveen.
Yeah, I can piggyback on kind of the ideas there and some of the questions about interpretability and whatnot. And I feel like adding in this kind of like simple models and making sure that you understand how like anybody can understand how they work is I think is super important. Because I feel like there's a lot of well-known models out there that nobody really understands how they work, like these new chatbots and language models and whatever they come out with. And I feel like because of that, they're very kind of brittle or lack robustness. And what this means is that when you deploy these in practice or when you try running these on different data sets, you have no clue if it's going to work or not. So you don't really have the confidence, I feel like, when you run these things that they'll actually work unless you have some sense of interpretability or robustness or something along those lines.
And I think you guys kind of like both went into this, and I think like where a lot of this kind of trust comes from, at least like in the case of models that I worked with, that Naveen has built and I have like looked at and stuff. He's shown me, and I know this at least, and I assume about the criminal justice related models too. There is always a person in this process. There is nothing deterministic about either of those models. Like they are exactly that. They are a tool. They are up for interpretation. And the decision is never made by the machine. Like someone sees the output, they see why, that's the output, and then they make a decision based on that. And it's just meant to improve that. And like I think the evidence overwhelmingly has been that it basically does. Sad. I want to get to these two questions in here that are in the chat, but I also wanted to ask you because Mary kind of touched on something. It was like, when someone needs a model versus an analysis versus a report, that seems like very much in your wheelhouse, kind of like how you help people land on that. Can you speak to that at all?
Sure. So reporting, there are so many things you can do for visualization, and there, there's so many tools out there. But in general, what I really like to suggest is to come up with a list of hypotheses, assumptions that your audience has. So after all, it's like if your stakeholders, your audience, if you're not addressing or uncovering their questions, you're not helping them make decisions or learning anything new, right? So before you analyze or before you go into this reporting mode, I would suggest to come up with a very strong hypothesis and ask your audience, like, hey, I'm going to create a report for you, and do you think this is what you want to know? Right. And after you create such report, after the deliverable, you ask, like, hey, could you make any decision? What new things, what did you learn? Right. So this closed loop process, I would say it's very important. And of course, there are so many, technical things that you can do, and Mary and Naveed can work on it. But I would say that that's a very must.
Yeah. I think this first question in here, I definitely want to start with Sat, and then I'd like people fill in where it makes sense to. Ronald asks, so Ronald is interested in building a broader set of initiatives to build pictures of impacts on community health. He's curious if you can speak towards standards for reporting the benefits of food recovery and redistribution to government agencies. I'm sure you're aware, in California, this is very important. There's the mandating of unsold food. And B, how we can use these standards to gauge performance of recovery efforts. And then, if we can start with Sat, and then people fill in where it makes sense to, how it informs their work, that kind of stuff would be perfect.
Yeah, so I'll start with A. It's very, very great question. Everybody thinks about it. But for governmental agencies, I tend to do a homework and find out what their this year's agenda. I'm sure each agencies have 5 things they must do in this year or next 3 years. So what I'd like to do is that helping them achieve their goal through food recovery. So I'll find the area that you also can help your, the agencies, your, governmental agencies' goal through this food recovery. So by having this overlap, identifying it, that's one thing I'll definitely, suggest. And then the second one is a use of standard. Yes. And this one, you may have your own standard way or different matrix, but for that too, let's find out what other organizations are using, and then basically, just avoiding building ways to gauge impacts and performance. Find out, just avoid a siloed way of gauging performance. Find out if you can speak the same language. Find out if you can use very similar way. Maybe sometimes you may need to change a formula that resonates with, who you work with. So I would say those 2 things: find out, their strategic goal, and find the overlap, and even the gauging, just find out ways that your client's organization can understand your calculation and formula. Sean, you're on mute.
I'm muted. So we are coming right up on time, but if I'd like to go kind of one by one, if either of those, if anything Sat just said spoke to either of you, and also if there is any parting words of wisdom, or if there's anything you want to share, advice on getting with your agencies. We have an agency rep here, and if we have advice on making connections with academic institutions, right? Because a lot of us have those partnerships. So I know I'm asking a lot for you to cover in a minute and a half, but I want to start with Naveen.
Yeah, thanks. This is really cool, by the way, and thanks to Mary and Sad and to Sean, of course. Um, yeah, I think this is all very cool. I guess at a high level, I guess the one thing I can talk about is connecting with academic institutions. As I kind of said in the slides, feel free to kind of reach out to anybody in academia. I think people are very open to kind of emails and cold emails and just kind of talking like that. And I think feel free to kind of reach out and set up a meeting, because especially if you have kind of access to data or something like that, we're more than happy to kind of help out, see if we can help out either on the kind of data side, the statistics side, or wherever we can. And so in terms of that, so feel free to kind of reach out to us. Feel free to reach out to me and just kind of any questions you have, anything in that space, that would be great.
Well, we'll end it with Mary.
Yeah, we'll comment on just a thing or two. I saw Lisa's question in the chat, and I think that like this, my 2 cents on that, and in general, I think like a closing takeaway is just to start small and start where you are. I think it can be overwhelming to think about like everything that you want to do or want to think about, or all this like the stories that you want to tell or to get across, but to start with the next right step, right? Like the most important thing to talk about, or most important problem to approach. And I think that like if you can reduce the clutter in what is your mental image of the work that you have to do, like that also can help you process and move through that. So that would be my advice. And to Naveen's point, in the last month alone, there have been 3 different researchers at universities who we've, got connected through a talk that they were giving, or saw a paper of theirs, or just reached out and we're like, hey, your work seems like it connects to ours. Like, want to chat about it? And everybody's always excited to do that. So I would say like, if you can get plugged into what folks are up to, I think that folks are generally really excited to connect and collaborate.
Yeah, well, I think that is about time. Reach out to anyone here. It's totally fine. Everyone at 412 is very easy to get a hold of. It is just my name at 412foodrescue.org. And we will make all of these, the recording will be available. We will put the slides out to everyone who signed up. But yeah, it was so wonderful talking to you guys. And I will hope to hear from all of you soon. I will be talking to Naveen this coming week. But yeah, I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye.